The old wooden fence leaned a little more precariously with each passing spring. I'm Carol, by the way, and I'd been meaning to get it fixed for longer than I care to admit. It wasn't just a boundary between my yard and the Hendersons. It felt like one more item on the ever-growing list of things I couldn't quite manage on my own since Jim passed. 48 felt too young to be a widow and too old to be learning how to wrangle a wobbly fence post. The Hendersons, Sarah and Tom, were good neighbors. Quiet, kept mostly to themselves, but always ready with a friendly wave. Tom was usually out puttering in his yard on Saturday mornings, the same way Jim used to. Sometimes the symmetry of it, the ghost of my own past routines mirrored next door, would give me a pang. That particular Saturday the sun was already climbing, promising a warm day. I was out on the patio, coffee in hand, staring at the fence. The sag was definitely worse. One of the posts looked as if it were performing a slow-motion bow toward the rose bushes. I sighed, the sound swallowed by the chirping of sparrows. I'd gotten a quote from a handyman, and frankly it made my eyes water. Money had been tighter since I was on my own. Just then I heard the familiar rumble of Tom's lawnmower cutting off. A moment later his voice carried over. "Morning, Carol. Nice day, isn't it?" I managed a smile. "Morning, Tom. It is, if you don't look too closely at my fence." He chuckled, a pleasant, easy sound, and walked over to the property line, wiping his brow with the back of his hand. Tom was a few years older than me, maybe mid-50s, with that weathered, capable look some men have. His hair was mostly silver, but his eyes were a clear, kind blue. "Yeah, I saw that post giving up the ghost. Tricky things, those old wooden ones." "Tell me about it," I said, taking another sip of coffee. "I've been putting off dealing with it." He squinted at the fence, then at me. "Look, Carol, I've got a post puller and some tools. I was planning on a quiet afternoon, but if you're not in a rush I could give you a hand. We could at least get that bad post out and see what you're dealing with." I was taken aback. It was such a kind offer. "Oh, Tom, I couldn't ask you to do that. It's your weekend." "Nonsense," he said, waving a dismissive hand. "Sarah's off to her sister's for the afternoon, so I'm at a loose end. Besides, what are neighbors for? It'll go faster with two sets of hands, even if one of them is mostly for passing tools." He grinned, a genuine warm smile that reached his eyes. A little flutter of something, relief, maybe a touch of nervousness, went through me. "Well, if you're sure. I'd be incredibly grateful. I can at least keep you supplied with iced tea." "Sounds like a fair trade. Let me grab my gear. Be over in a bit." He disappeared back into his garage. I stood there a moment, a little stunned. It had been so long since someone had simply offered to help like that without any expectation. Jim had always been the fixer. Since he'd been gone I'd either paid someone or muddled through, feeling increasingly incompetent. True to his word, about 20 minutes later Tom was at my gate, laden with a hefty post puller, a shovel, a level, and a toolbox that looked as if it had seen plenty of action. He wore an old faded blue t-shirt and jeans and looked entirely at ease. "All right," he said, setting his things down. "Let's assess the patient." We stood side by side looking at the offending post. It was rotted through at the base, just as I'd suspected. "Yep, she's a goner," Tom declared. "But the good news is the other posts around it look fairly sound. We might just need to replace this one and maybe reinforce the next one along." There was something comforting about his calm assessment. He didn't make it sound like a catastrophe, just a job to be done. For the next hour or so we worked. Or rather, Tom worked and I did my best to assist. I held things, cleared away debris, and ran to the shed for bits and pieces he thought might be useful. He was patient, explaining what he was doing and why a certain tool was better for a particular task. He never made me feel foolish for not knowing the difference between a lag bolt and a carriage bolt. The sun climbed higher. The air grew thick with the smell of freshly turned earth and cut wood. We didn't talk much, not about anything deep, just the task at hand, occasional comments about the weather, or a shared chuckle when a particularly stubborn root refused to yield. The silence wasn't awkward. It was companionable, the silence of two people working toward a common goal. He was surprisingly strong, his movements economical and efficient. I found myself watching his hands sometimes, capable, calloused hands that knew their way around tools. There was a quiet competence about him I hadn't really registered before, seeing him only across the yard. Around noon, when the old post finally lay on the grass like a fallen soldier, Tom straightened up, wiping sweat from his forehead with his forearm. "Think we deserve that iced tea now, Carol?" "Coming right up," I said, feeling a warmth spread through me that had nothing to do with the sun. It was the warmth of simple human connection, of a shared task, of unexpected kindness. As I went inside to fix the drinks, I realized my hands were trembling just a little, not from exertion, but from something else. A feeling I hadn't had in a long, long time. A mixture of gratitude and a strange, quiet stir of emotion, like a forgotten garden suddenly showing a few tentative green shoots. What was happening was just a neighbor helping another. But it felt like so much more. We sat on my small patio under the shade of the faded canvas umbrella, sipping tall glasses of iced tea heavy with lemon. The silence returned, but it was different now, softer. The hard part of the job, the digging and pulling, was done. Tom had propped a temporary support under the fence rail, making it look much less alarming. "You know," Tom said, swirling the ice in his glass, "my dad used to say that mending fences was more about mending spirits. Kept the hands busy and the mind clear." I looked at him. Really looked at him. His blue eyes held a thoughtful expression. "He sounds like a wise man." "He had his moments," Tom said with a small smile. He leaned back in his chair, looking out at my slightly overgrown flower beds. "Sarah's always on at me about our garden. Says I spend more time fixing things than planting them." "Everyone has their talents," I said. "You're clearly good at the fixing part." "My Jim, he was the gardener. I try, but mostly the weeds win." It was easy to say Jim's name to him, easier than it had been with most people. Tom nodded slowly. "It's hard when you lose your partner in crime for those things. Sarah's the planner, the organizer. I'm the labor." He chuckled. "We make a decent team most days." There was a comfortable honesty in his words. He wasn't fishing for sympathy or trying to pry. He was just talking. And I found myself wanting to talk too, to share something of the quiet landscape of my own life. "It is hard," I agreed, my voice a little softer than I intended. "Sometimes the silence in the house is the loudest thing. Or the little jobs like this fence. They just seem to pile up, a reminder of what's missing." He met my gaze. There was a profound understanding there, a kindness that didn't need words. He didn't offer platitudes. No "he's in a better place" or "time heals all wounds." He just listened, his presence a steady anchor in the warm afternoon. "I can imagine," he said quietly. "My dad passed a few years before I met Sarah. My mom, she struggled for a long time with the quiet, with the empty side of the bed." His sharing of that, so open and unprompted, touched me. It was a glimpse into his own life, his own understanding of loss, offered so gently. We talked a little more then about our lives, not in great detail, but in a way that sketched out the shapes of our experiences. He told me about his grown kids, one on the East Coast, one still in state but a few hours away. I talked a little about my own career as a librarian before I retired early to care for Jim. The conversation flowed easily, as if we'd known each other for years rather than just as nodding acquaintances over the very fence we were now mending. There was no pretense, no awkwardness, just two people sharing a bit of their Saturday, a bit of their stories. As the afternoon wore on and the sun began its slow descent, casting longer shadows across the lawn, Tom got to his feet. "Well, I should probably let you have your evening, Carol. We can pick this up tomorrow if you like. Get a new post set in concrete. It'll need a day or two to cure properly before we attach the rails." "Tomorrow would be wonderful, Tom," I said, genuinely meaning it. The thought of another day like this, of quiet companionship and shared effort, was surprisingly appealing. "I really can't thank you enough. You've been a lifesaver." He shrugged good-naturedly. "Happy to help. And the iced tea was first-rate." He gathered his tools and I walked him to the gate. "Let me know what I owe you for the post and the concrete mix when you get them," I said. "We'll sort it," he replied easily. Don't you worry about that. He paused at the gate, then turned back to me, a hint of something I couldn't quite decipher in his eyes. It was nice, Carol, talking with you. It was for me too, Tom, I said, and my voice was steadier now, the earlier trembling replaced by a quiet warmth. Really nice. He nodded once, then headed back across his lawn. I watched him go, a tall, capable figure disappearing into the shade of his own trees. I turned back to my yard, to the temporarily shored-up fence. It looked better already, more hopeful. I went back inside. The house felt a little less empty than it had that morning. As I rinsed our iced tea glasses, I noticed my hands were still again. But the feeling inside me, that quiet, unexpected stirring, was still there. It wasn't just about a mended fence anymore. It was about a connection made, a shared afternoon that had somehow subtly shifted something within me. I felt a sense of anticipation for the next day, not just for the fence to be properly fixed, but for the simple, unassuming company of my neighbor. It was a surprising feeling, a little unsettling, but undeniably there. And as I replayed the day, the easy conversation, the shared work, the quiet understanding in his eyes, I felt a different kind of shaking begin, a gentle tremor of hope, of possibility, in a part of my heart I thought had long since gone dormant. The next morning dawned bright and clear, just as the weatherman had promised. I woke with a feeling I hadn't experienced in years, a lightness, an almost eagerness. It was Sunday, usually a quiet day for me, often tinged with a little melancholy as the weekend wound down and another solitary week loomed. But today felt different. Today Tom was coming back to finish the fence. I made sure I was up and dressed and had a fresh pot of coffee brewing well before I expected him. I even found myself humming as I moved around the kitchen, a little tune I hadn't thought of in ages. I caught my reflection in the microwave door. There was a slight flush on my cheeks and my eyes seemed brighter. It was silly, I told myself. He was just being a good neighbor. But my heart didn't seem to care much for sensible explanations. Around 9 I heard the familiar sound of his pickup truck pulling up out front, not in his driveway. A moment later he was at the gate, a new wooden post resting on his shoulder and a couple of bags of concrete mix in his hands. He had that same calm, capable air about him. "Morning, Carol," he said, his voice as warm as the sunshine. "Ready for round 2? "Morning, Tom." "More than ready," I replied, a genuine smile spreading across my face. "Coffee's fresh if you want a cup before we start." "Sounds good," he said, setting down his load just inside the gate. "Lead the way." We sat on the patio again, just like the day before, sipping coffee. The initial awkwardness I'd half expected, wondering if yesterday's easy camaraderie had been a fluke, simply wasn't there. It felt natural, comfortable. We talked about mundane things, the squirrel that kept raiding Sarah's bird feeder, the forecast for the coming week. He mentioned Sarah was out for a long bike ride with her group that morning. Then he set his mug down. "All right. Let's get this post in the ground before it gets too hot." The work today was different, less about brute force, more about precision. Tom meticulously measured the depth of the hole, ensuring it was just right. He showed me how to mix the concrete, the right consistency to aim for, not too wet, not too dry. I found myself completely absorbed, listening to his explanations, watching his hands as he worked. There was a rhythm to it, a satisfying sense of creation. He had me hold the post steady while he carefully poured the concrete around its base, tamping it down, checking the level repeatedly from all sides. "This is the crucial part," he said, his brow furrowed in concentration. "Get the post set right and the rest of the fence will follow. Get it wrong and you'll be fighting it all the way." I thought there was a kind of life lesson in that, and I smiled. Like a lot of things, I suppose. He glanced up at me, a quick, understanding look. Exactly. Like a lot of things. We worked in comfortable tandem. He'd ask for a tool and I'd know which one he meant. I'd offer a rag to wipe his brow before he even realized he needed it. It was an unspoken dance of cooperation, a quiet harmony that settled over my little backyard. The air was filled with the scent of damp earth, concrete, and the faint sweet perfume of the honeysuckle climbing my trellis nearby. Once the post was set, braced, and perfectly plumb, Tom stepped back, hands on his hips, a look of satisfaction on his face. There. That's not going anywhere for a good long while. It looks wonderful, Tom, I said. And I meant it. It was just a single fence post, but it felt like a monument to something more. You're a miracle worker. He chuckled. Hardly a miracle. Just a bit of know-how and some elbow grease. He looked at me then, his blue eyes kind. You're a good helper, Carol. You've got a knack for anticipating what's needed. His compliment warmed me more than the morning sun. Thanks, Tom. I enjoyed it, honestly. Me too, he said, and his gaze lingered for just a moment longer than necessary. A silent acknowledgement of the pleasant hours we'd shared. We cleaned up the tools, coiled the hose, and for a while just stood there admiring our handiwork. The rest of the fence still looked a bit tired in comparison to the sturdy new post and the freshly disturbed earth around it. But it was a start, a definite improvement. It'll need to set for a day or two, Tom said. Then we can reattach the rails. Maybe Tuesday afternoon, if you're free. I can come over after work. Tuesday would be perfect, I said. The thought of seeing him again, of sharing another task, sent another little flutter through me. As he prepared to leave, loading his tools back into his truck, an idea struck me. It was a little bold, perhaps, but the last 2 days had filled me with a quiet confidence I hadn't felt in ages. Tom, I began a little hesitantly, as a thank you, a proper thank you, would you and Sarah like to come over for dinner one evening once the fence is all done? I'm not a gourmet cook, but I make a pretty decent lasagna. He paused, then turned, a genuinely pleased smile lighting up his face. Carol, that's a lovely offer. I'm sure Sarah would enjoy that very much. We'd like that a lot. Good, I said, relief and pleasure bubbling up. We can set a day when you come over on Tuesday. Sounds like a plan, he said. He gave a final wave and then he was gone, the sound of his truck fading down the street. I walked back into my house. And this time the silence didn't feel loud or oppressive. It felt peaceful. The house seemed to breathe with me. I went to the kitchen window and looked out at the new post, standing straight and true. It was more than just a piece of wood set in concrete. It was a symbol of a connection forged, of kindness given and received. The rest of Sunday and Monday passed in a pleasant haze of anticipation. I found myself tidying the house with more enthusiasm than usual, thinking about recipes. It wasn't just about thanking Tom for his help with the fence anymore. It was about nurturing this fledgling friendship, this unexpected warmth that had crept into my life. On Tuesday afternoon Tom arrived as promised. There was an easy familiarity between us now. Reattaching the fence rails to the new post was quicker work. He showed me how to ensure they were level and secure, his instructions clear and patient. Within an hour the job was done. The fence stood straight and strong, a tangible result of our shared efforts. There you have it, Carol, he said, wiping his hands on a rag. Good as new. Maybe even better. It's perfect, Tom, I said, feeling a genuine sense of accomplishment and gratitude. I absolutely couldn't have done it without you. I looked from the fence to him, meeting his kind eyes. Thank you for everything. My pleasure, Carol. Truly. He leaned against the newly mended fence, looking relaxed and content. So, about that lasagna. When's good for you and Sarah? We settled on Friday evening. He said Sarah was already looking forward to it, that she'd been hearing all about the fence project. I felt a little blush creep up my neck at that, wondering what exactly he'd told her, but his easy smile reassured me. As he left that day there was a different quality to our goodbye. It wasn't just neighborly anymore. There was an undercurrent of shared experience, of a new connection that had taken root. Walking back into my house I felt a profound sense of peace, but also a quiet excitement. The fence was mended, yes, but in the process something else had been repaired too. A little piece of my own heart. A little piece of my ability to connect, to feel, to look forward to simple things like a dinner with new friends. My hands weren't shaking anymore. Instead they felt steady, ready for whatever came next. The world felt a little wider, a little brighter, all because my neighbor had offered to help. Friday arrived cloaked in the soft hues of a perfect early summer evening. I'd spent the better part of the afternoon in a happy flurry of preparation. The lasagna, my tried-and-true recipe, was bubbling gently in the oven, its rich aroma filling the house. I'd made a big salad, picked up a fresh loaf of crusty Italian bread from the bakery, and even found a bottle of Chianti I'd been saving. The small dining table, which had seen too many solitary meals, was set for 3, adorned with a simple bouquet of daisies from my garden. I was nervous, I'll admit. It had been so long since I'd hosted anyone other than family, and never neighbors I was only just getting to know on a deeper level. I smoothed down my simple blue dress for the 10th time, catching my reflection. I looked nice. Happy. Even the worry lines around my eyes seemed a little softer. Right on time the doorbell chimed. My heart did a little flip. Taking a deep breath, I opened the door to find Tom and Sarah standing there, both smiling warmly. Sarah was lovely, with a kind face framed by soft brown curls and eyes that crinkled at the corners when she smiled, just like Tom's. She held out a bottle of wine. "Carol, thank you so much for having us," she said, her voice friendly and genuine. "And Tom has told me what an amazing foreman you were on the fence project." I laughed, feeling some of my nervousness dissipate. He's a generous storyteller. "Come in, please." The evening flowed with an ease that surprised and delighted me. Sarah was just as personable and easy to talk to as Tom. She was a retired teacher, full of interesting anecdotes and a gentle humor. We talked about everything and nothing: gardening, books, local happenings, their recent trip to visit their daughter. There were no awkward silences, no forced conversation. It felt like spending time with old friends. Tom, for his part, was relaxed and engaging. He shared a few funny stories about his own DIY misadventures over the years, making us both laugh. Watching him interact with Sarah, the easy affection and shared history between them, was lovely. There was a comfortable rhythm to their partnership, a quiet understanding that spoke volumes. There wasn't a hint of anything that made me feel uncomfortable, just warmth and genuine friendliness. During dinner, Sarah said, "Tom was so pleased to be able to help with your fence, Carol. He really enjoys having a project. And I think he enjoyed the company too." She gave him an affectionate look. Tom smiled. "It was good working with you, Carol. Good to connect." "It was for me too," I said, my gaze meeting his briefly before turning back to Sarah. "Honestly, you have no idea how much I appreciated it. That fence had become my Everest." Sarah nodded sympathetically. "Oh, I understand. After my father passed, my mom used to say the little things around the house felt like mountains. It's not always about the task itself, is it?" "Exactly," I agreed, feeling a wave of gratitude for her understanding. The conversation meandered, touching on lighter topics, then occasionally dipping into more thoughtful reflections. We talked about changes in the neighborhood, about how life unfolds in unexpected ways. I found myself opening up more than I usually did with new acquaintances, sharing a little about Jim, about my own journey through grief and rediscovery. They listened with such empathy, such quiet respect. There was no pity in their eyes, only understanding. Tom didn't dominate the conversation, but when he spoke, his words often had a quiet wisdom to them, much like the insights he'd shared while we were working on the fence. He spoke of the importance of community, of neighbors looking out for one another. He mentioned how much he and Sarah valued the peace and quiet of their street. As we ate my lasagna, which I was relieved to see they both seemed to genuinely enjoy, I felt a sense of contentment wash over me. This was what I had been missing, I realized. Not just the companionship of a spouse, but this easy reciprocal connection with other people. The sharing of food, of laughter, of stories. After dinner, we moved to the living room with our wine. The conversation continued to flow. At one point, Sarah mentioned a book club she was part of and, noticing my interest, invited me to join them for their next meeting. "We're a friendly bunch, Carol. I think you'd enjoy it." "I'd love that, Sarah," I said, genuinely touched by the invitation. "Thank you." As the evening drew to a close and Tom and Sarah prepared to leave, I felt a little pang of regret that it was ending. "Carol, this was just wonderful," Sarah said, giving me a warm hug at the door. "The food was delicious and the company even better. We must do this again." "I'd like that very much," I replied, my heart full. Tom shook my hand, his grip firm and warm. Thanks, Carol, for everything. His eyes held that familiar kindness, but also something more, a look of genuine friendship. The fence looks great, by the way. Solid as a rock. Thanks to you, I said, smiling. After they left, I stood in the quiet of my living room, the lingering scent of garlic and wine in the air. The house didn't feel empty. It felt full of the warmth of new friendship, of shared laughter, of human connection. I walked over to the window and looked out into the darkness. I could just make out the faint silhouette of the mended fence line, a sturdy, reassuring presence. It was just a fence, a simple structure of wood and concrete. But it had become so much more. It was a catalyst. A bridge. The shaking I'd felt that first day Tom offered to help, that tremor of unexpected emotion, of surprise, had long since subsided. In its place was a deep sense of gratitude and a quiet joy. My neighbor had offered to help. And what happened next hadn't just left me shaking. It had left me changed. It had reopened a door within me, a door to connection, to community, to the simple, profound beauty of human kindness. I realized that personal discovery often comes in the most unexpected packages. Sometimes it's in the form of a wobbly fence post and a neighbor willing to lend a hand. It taught me that even in the quiet corners of life, when you least expect it, connections can be forged that mend more than just fences. They can mend spirits, too. And as I went to bed that night, I slept more soundly than I had in years, my heart feeling not just mended, but also wonderfully, hopefully alive.